Morning to you, Darren. We heard from Theresa May in a statement there last night. Just tell us, what are her next steps? What are the options open to her now?
Well, Belle, after a dramatic few days in British politics, we know that the UK Parliament is most certainly against her deal. We know also that they don't quite fancy an alternative government. But be in no doubt, we're also not actually really any closer in any way to working out what the British Parliament do want in terms of a deal with the European Union, or what type of Brexit they want. We have seen Theresa May finally, over the last 12 hours or so, reach out to other parliamentarians, to other party leaders. Most notably, she met with the SNP, the Scottish Nationalists, the Welsh Nationalists and the Liberal Democrats last night. Many would say way too late in this process. She should have worked out that she couldn't rely on her own party to get any deal through much earlier. But of course, conversations are not necessarily compromises. They are not actually deal forging, because many would say Theresa May is going to fundamentally have to move on her red lines if she is going to get a deal through Parliament. And in doing so, of course, there then is the big political risk for Theresa May that she ultimately ends up splitting her own party, the Conservative Party, because, be in no doubt, she's going to have to tack one way or another. And in doing so, she's likely to split the cabinet and indeed many of her own backbenchers. If she goes for, as is being suggested, a softer form of Brexit, potentially staying inside the customs union, there are many cabinet ministers who are against that, not least Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary. Essentially, his job would disappear. Also, if she was to take a much harder line, go with the much more hard form of Brexit, potentially even supporting no deal, she would see mass resignations within her government. It is incredibly politically difficult. Her next move, a bit like a game of chess, really could be a checkmate in some ways for the Conservative Party. So profound are those issues for the ruling governing party.
And on that chessboard, of course, is Jeremy Corbyn, to whom she's extended that olive branch. He hasn't taken it. He says unless she meets his demands, he will not take it. What's his game here?
Yeah, indeed. Of course, he is playing a political game as well. You may have noted that when I listed out those political parties, it didn't include the main opposition party here in the UK, the Labour Party, because Jeremy Corbyn has thus far refused to meet with Theresa May, even though in many ways, of course, his next move could unlock this process very easily as well. But he has to be politically aware that Labour are also divided on this issue of Brexit. And in meeting Theresa May, many party members and indeed many of his own MPs would feel that they are helping to facilitate Brexit. Many of them want to simply remain inside the European Union. They want a second referendum. They're not even prepared to compromise on a softer form of Brexit. And ultimately, of course, Jeremy Corbyn wants to see a general election. He wants to see almost the Conservative Party split. That is why the Prime Minister last night here in Downing Street tried in some way to talk over him, talk over the party politics and address the people, the nation, and say that she was acting in the national interest. But many of her critics would say, as I said, this is way too late in the game. And ultimately, when it comes to politics, the most important function is your ability to count. She has thus far not been able to do that, relying way too much that her middle ground deal would get through. That is simply not now going to happen. And the question is, what will happen? Who can she get on board? And is she fundamentally willing to compromise on her red lines in order to do that? But as I say, at a risk of splitting her own party.
All right, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor outside Downing Street there, and we will be heading to Brussels in a moment. But first, what is next for Theresa May? We've been talking about it a little bit there with Darren. The Cube's Alex Morgan now is going to take us through those possible options.
Let's just have a look at where all this leaves us now. And I think it's quite telling that a graphic I made before the Prime Minister spoke is still accurate after she spoke. We really haven't seen much movement there in that speech. These are some of the main options. Imagine it's like a train journey, if you will. We're looking at a subway map. These are some of the stops the UK could get off at. First of all, let's start up top very quickly. Renegotiation. So that's both within Parliament, of course. Theresa May saying there that MPs should work together to find out what they want. Then, of course, at some point, the UK will have to go back to the EU. There could then be a renegotiated withdrawal agreement that could command the support of the UK Parliament, leading to Brexit. The EU, however, have said that was the best deal you're going to get. We'll see where that goes from there, of course. Alternatively, well, whatever, is say there's an agreement or Theresa May tries to get her agreement back again, we could see take two. That's an attempt to get something else through the UK Parliament. Be that a renegotiated deal or maybe some form of the deal Theresa May already has. We will see. Then, of course, here, another stop the UK could hop off at. Article 50 extension. That is to delay the exit date of March further along, allowing the process to work itself out. There's been a lot of opposition to that, but people, of course, are talking about all these options. It's an uncertain process. Let's just move down here. Well, imagining another deal doesn't get through, the Labour Party, the opposition, could try again to bring a no-confidence vote in the government, trying to trigger a general election, sweeping Theresa May from power. That is still their preferred point, although we'll see, of course, where over the next couple of days they go. Just down here as well, imagining, say, the government clings on. Could we have no deal? Could the legal default, that is what is currently in place, the UK leaving without a deal, take place in March? Yet to be seen. Of course, the opposition say we'll only talk to Theresa May if she takes it off the table. Interesting point there. And just finally, if I may, down here, talk of a second referendum. At the moment, the maths in the UK Parliament does not support that referendum. The opposition party still support, they want an election. They don't want a referendum at the moment. That's the official line. So seems unlikely at the moment. Of course, a lot of vocal voices. But either way, destination Brexit, if that's what we're going to call this map, it's looking a bit tangled like that right now, but what we've learned from Theresa May is she's engaging in these talks. She's then going to try and see what could get through Parliament, and at some point we know that will, of course, involve going back to the EU, seeing what can be discussed, and then trying to see if that can go through Parliament. It's confusing, and I don't think we're any clearer about the exact end destination.
Alex Morgan there in the Cube. Well, to try and make some more sense of this, we're heading to Brussels now to get some European reaction to that deadlock in the UK Parliament. Shona Murray is in Brussels for us this morning. Hi, Shona. How is Brussels viewing Theresa May and essentially her survival act?
Well, essentially, I suppose last night's win for the government and the defeat the night before were very well forecast, so nobody's surprised. But there is some exasperation that the UK appears to be still arguing with itself over what it wants in relation to the withdrawal agreement, a possible second referendum, and still conversations about amendments to the backstop, which the EU says it won't entertain. One thing that has been certain over the past few weeks is that the European Union, the member states, have all said that the backstop within this withdrawal agreement, which is obviously the most controversial element, has to remain in place. Now, there is some welcome that at least now Theresa May is speaking to the opposition, which means that whatever suggestions or requests she comes back to Brussels with, at least may have a consensus, which means that they could make some progress in getting something over the line. But we heard from several members of the member states yesterday. We heard from Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron and the European Commission, all said that they would entertain possibly an extension of Article 50 depending on the reason. There would have to be a valid reason, i.e. a second referendum, a general election, or in order to pass legislation to get a different type of Brexit over the line, such as maybe access to the single market or the customs union. But of course, all also said they will be preparing for a no-deal scenario. And here's what Chancellor Merkel had to say yesterday.
We want the damage to be as small as possible. And there will certainly be damage as a result of Britain's withdrawal. That is why, of course, we will try to find an orderly solution. But we are also prepared for there to be no such orderly solution. That is why tomorrow in the German Bundestag we will also be discussing the laws presented by the federal government, which would apply in case of no agreement with Britain on the exit. We still have time to negotiate, but we are now waiting to see what the British Prime Minister proposes.
So, of course, that was Angela Merkel speaking yesterday, saying that there is some time left to negotiate. What she means there, of course, is a negotiation which would mean that the withdrawal agreement would have to remain in place, but a renegotiation of possibly the political declaration on the future relationship, meaning that if the British decided they wanted a closer Brexit or a softer Brexit, then they could have that. But as it stands at the withdrawal agreement, the backstop has to remain in place. So really all eyes remain on Westminster. As we know, Theresa May is locked in because she has to come back with a solution to the House of Commons by early next week. So there is an anticipation that there could be a phone call coming perhaps by the end of the week, that there could be a visit of Theresa May. But the most important thing is that whatever she suggests has to be able to pass in the House of Commons, because certainly there is quite a bit of frustration over in Brussels that whatever Theresa May says in Brussels, hasn't actually materialised, and that has to change. That's pretty clear.
And while EU leaders are waiting for that phone call from the UK Prime Minister, how much is Brussels preparing for a no-deal Brexit if nothing changes before March the 29th?
Well, we saw last year, just the end of last year, the EU published a number of papers in relation to how it would react to a no-deal scenario. They're very much bare bones, mitigating the worst effects of Brexit in relation to the finance industry, in relation to some elements of trade, and really just reciprocal arrangements for citizens within the European Union and within the UK. But that would have to be reciprocated. It's still the worst option by far for all economies, and also in relation to, I suppose, the Good Friday Agreement, which was the reason why we have this backstop. That would be a real concern for member states too. So nobody wants a no-deal scenario. But as we heard from Alex, and as we've heard for the past few days, it doesn't mean it's off the table, and that there's a fear that the UK could sleepwalk its way into this.